Welcome to the Predictive World series brought to you by SalesChoice, which specializes in ending revenue uncertainty for human advantage. I'm your host, Jen Yim. I'm the Director of Product and Marketing at SalesChoice, where we bring 3 services powered by our AI platform. So there's Sales Insights, which helps sales professionals with guided insights, Mood Insights, which helps connect frontline voices to leadership, and third, our AI and Data Science as a Service offering, where we design, build, and maintain AI models with a new focus on generative AI. Over the years, we've been hosting numerous experts and thought leaders on AI and revenue growth, and we've built a trove of podcasts and webinars, white papers, and more. It's almost 10 years old, this trove. So we invite our listeners to go to saleschoice.com for more of those resources. And today I have with us Brian Klingbeil and Jim Kozlowski. I'd love to welcome them and pleasure to meet you. And Brian, if you can tell us a bit about your backstory.
Sure. I'm Chief Strategy Officer of Ensono. Was part of the journey with Ensono, where we call ourselves sometimes the world's oldest startup. We in private equity did a carve out of a pre-existing company that was about 8.5 years ago. At the time, it was about $180 million of revenue. Now we're just about $1 billion as of next month, and went from 650 employees up to right around 3,400 now. I joined in the capacity of board member and chief operating officer. And then over the years, as we've gotten bigger and matured, handed those tasks off to people more capable and settled into this role as chief strategy officer, where I set the strategy of the company, which, as you can imagine, very AI centric at the moment.
All right. And Jim, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, great. I run data center operations for Ensono and also some capacity planning, which is relevant to some of the topics today. Past history, I worked for Savvis and CenturyLink, running data center operations at some of those entities, as well as data center construction, which included site selection, working with utilities, things like that. And so, have a bit of background across cloud industries, hosting industries as well. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
And since Jim won't say it, the estate that he managed there was fairly massive, 55 data centers all across the globe.
Wow, amazing.
55, wow.
Brian, could you tell us a bit about Ensono?
Sure. Ensono, we actually have a specialty in mainframe. And the reason that's relevant to all this stuff is we specialize in a hybrid, really, but we're one of the few hybrid players that can do everything from mainframe all the way up to cloud and AI and some of the things you mentioned in the opening. So a good way to think of Ensono is we are about $1 billion of annual revenue, but we only have about 250 recurring clients. And when you divide 250 into $1 billion, you'll still get a very large number. And you'll see that we serve very large enterprises with very complex needs who have been around for a while. We typically won't serve. Occasionally here and there we'll do projects for born in the cloud type companies, but mostly you're going to see like large insurance companies, healthcare companies, banks, financial services, large manufacturers, things like that. And they all share the same common traits, which is they all have a footprint in legacy and a footprint in modern, and they want to join the two together. So I'm struck by your product set, particularly Sales Insights, because sales forecasting and one of the challenges we have as a company, because we're a fairly binary business. At any given time, we're probably working on, or we'll close in any given month, maybe 5 just very large deals, and you either close them or you don't. So having better insight into which ones are going to close, our sales forecasting is a constant challenge because of the type of clients we serve.
Awesome.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Dr. Cindy Gordon to start the conversation.
Thanks, Jennifer, and Brian and Jim. Welcome. I wish we were sitting here out on my summer patio and having a nice glass of whatever would be your fave. We've got a very French-looking garden here. I was struck by some of the earlier material that I read, and there's so much I want to talk about on the sustainability side, but I think just to have you echo first, Brian, the vision of the company, because I'm a former venture capitalist, experience in private equity. So I know when you're, acquiring other assets and you're restructuring and you're moving ahead, and your point on legacy versus modernization. So obviously you've got a hybrid environment, but what is the overall vision? Is it to migrate everybody over to cloud, or is it, are you seeing some of the realities and some of the security issues, even though, yeah, I think you know what I mean. There's still people that are a little
Yeah.
concerned on cyber. So.
I know 100% what you mean is a very insightful and astute question, and Jim can echo in sort of the data center side of this, but you can't just lift and shift everything from legacy to cloud. First of all, it takes time, and you have to sweat assets, and the applications are complex. And in the case of mainframes, where we have about 50% of our business is mainframe, oftentimes the people who wrote the code are no longer with us, and it's difficult to find that source code. But more importantly, or maybe as importantly, sometimes that legacy stuff is just awfully good at running certain applications. So we urge people to use us to map their application portfolio, based on how critical that application is for your environment, what kind of assets you have in place, and how suitable its present execution venue is to meet the needs of the business. So it's something that has to be done incrementally versus monolithically. And we're fond of saying the battlefield is littered with the bodies of people who have tried to do like massive shifts in technology. And there's just so many things that get in the way of that. You mentioned security is certainly one of them. Some of these systems are tried and true, and they tend to be, while the interesting shiny thing is the cloud and AI and all the things that go with that, and that is totally the future. It's not typically supporting a massive amount of revenue yet. It is definitely going to be. So the legacy technology tends to be doing all the heavy lifting. It's got its back is hurting from the weight of the revenue that it's supporting for the company. So you can't be caught in the innovator's dilemma and not do nothing. You have to move, but you have to be put in a position where you can do so methodically and on a needs base. And that's what we've tried to build. We've tried to build a portfolio where we call ourselves a relentless ally as part of our tagline. But the point of it really is, a big part of its culture. You hire the right people, but you put them in a position where we win when the customer wins. So we wouldn't want to have just mainframe and tell people, well, you don't want to move off the mainframe. It's tried and true. And we wouldn't want to have just cloud, because we'd say, what are you doing with that old mainframe? It doesn't make any sense. So we wanted to have a fulsome portfolio that would allow us to be objective and to be that relentless ally. So what we end up with is a certain level of complexity, but necessary to do integration. And then our data centers will look, the data centers that Jim runs, sometimes you'll see things in there that Indiana Jones would say that belongs in a museum. And sometimes you'll see stuff that looks like a spaceship. And sometimes it's not our data center at all. But more and more often, it's just an integration of that maybe museum quality kit with microservices in the cloud. So Jim is managing sort of across that spectrum.
Yeah, we were talking about the legacy. I immediately had a flashback of university learning to program in COBOL, and I can really appreciate some of the mainframe legacy infrastructures and the talent that may have drifted, and people don't have that historical knowledge. And I think it's a lot of wisdom, moving in a very wise, optimized roadmap strategy. Jim, thoughts to add?
Yeah, the word I would say is stability, right? When you think of some of and we'll continue to use these words during this conversation of, the coolness of AI and the potential of AI, but I would tell you a number one thing our customers ask of us: stability. They have current customers, current revenue streams. They cannot afford downtime or issues with that, even through transformations that we're helping them with, right? And the AI considerations that they're doing. So number one thing I do as the person that runs data center operations, those data centers stay up and running 24/7, and we don't make changes, I guess you would say, violently or without a long planning cycle. So whether that's my operation or the customer's operations themselves, as they consider adding the piece parts of AI or doing a proof of concept there, that's the number one thing. Stay stable, keep your customers happy today, and make them more happy in the future once changes are good to go.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a different beat than you'd certainly be getting from the Microsoft Azure pounding cloud faster, and the Amazon, tribe, faster. How are you finding within the ecosystem, the data center operators? I mean, you're an operating team, right? And, are people starting to recognize that they really need to be ready to upgrade and to migrate wisely? Are they feeling pressure that they're not moving fast enough? any business insights on what you see, across the ecosystem, because you obviously have a global purview as well.
Yeah, and I'll start, Jim. There's definitely been a recognition. Look, our clients are really smart, and they operate some of the Fortune 500 type level companies. And I think when you talk to them logically without hype, I think they value that quite a bit. And we're not we're not going to talk about legacy is the future and then get in our horse and buggy, as Jim says, and right away. We know where the future is. We just want to plot out a path that gets them there while providing the stability that Jim talks about along the way. We actually have something unique in the industry is this thing we call Ensono Flex, which basically says you can come to us with mainframe or private cloud or x86 servers managed in your own data center. And when those applications, when it's time, when you're ready to move those applications to cloud, as long as Ensono's involved in that move and we're managing them in their end state, we allow that. No penalties, no worries on the existing contract. So, and that goes back to my opening comments. I don't want to make this an infomercial for Ensono, but it's what we saw would add value, which is you don't know when you can move. You don't know how difficult it is to move yet. You're in the evaluation phase. So having optionality to say, well, as long as I keep the workload with Ensono, I can move it from mainframe to cloud or from my own data center to cloud or from cloud to microservices. And as long as we're still involved, we provide that flexibility to clients. And from our side, we know we win some, we lose some. Like on some of those transactions, we might lose a bit of money. On others, we'll make a bit more money. But we feel like the customer value is where it's at. And just a brief, maybe slight non sequitur to AI. I also run, as part of my job, client advisory board. So we already have some of the top companies in the world, and we take kind of the top 15, 20, and we meet 3 times a year. And kind of half the agenda is them advising us on how to be a better service provider. So nice to have control of the entity that you depend on. And then the other half is just them sharing with each other. And this year's in-person session we just had in March, and we did something a little different, and we just had them present to each other about what they are doing around AI. And I think they all found tremendous value in that, because across the board, with one notable exception, in a good way, we have one client who's actually buying their own NVIDIA H100 chips and doing some really cool and valuable stuff in healthcare. But that was the exception. Everybody else was like, yeah, we're doing kind of 5 proof of concepts, testing them out, trying to see which ones add business value, where am I going to want to spend money, and they were able to kind of talk to each other. And I think you read so much about the hype and you feel like, I'm behind. And then you see 14 other of the top companies in the world kind of at the same spot you are, give them some level of comfort. And maybe 1 or 2 of them going, I'm behind. I better start doing some of those proof of concepts and seeing which applications of AI are gonna be valuable for my company.
Yeah, for sure. Jim builds on that, and I'll echo a comment back. Jim, any thoughts from your?
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example. That a customer that I'm working on right now in one of our data centers. They've been a long-term customer of ours, one of our top 5, and we are working through a refresh for them, and they are putting in a set of servers that have some blade frames in them. That each one of these blocks of the blade frame are about 5 kilowatts a blade frame. You can only put a few of them in a rack in our data centers. That is a high compute environment. Would I call it AI? It's almost there. It's not the NVIDIA chips, but they're only doing that on a subset of their environment today. They are going to refresh their other environment with new compute, but they still have a mainframe. They still have a massive amount of total compute capacity.
9,000 VMs in that data center around that mainframe. That's right.
And they have a little bit of public cloud. So I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some customers start making decisions, like Brian said, hey, let's go for it. We're going to put in, I think that's going to end up being a dozen racks in my data center with those higher powered sort of compute components. So I think you're going to see that more than, to Brian's point, let's rip it all out. Let's start fresh. I mean, that's a massive investment. And most of these companies, from an IT budget perspective, you just can't afford that in your daily run. Right?
Yeah, they've got huge maintenance operating costs and very little, room for modernization. If you actually look at, the cost realities that are very, especially in legacy organizations.
Correct.
One of the things that I know, one of the reasons we're here today is we're very passionate about responsible AI and particularly sustainability. and you've been building some new capabilities on more efficient operations. So I'd love to hear the backdrop, Brian, there. Obviously, you guys are focused on the environment. I've been writing quite a bit on the concerns that I have, certainly on the general AI and the computational algorithmic hogs that we have, and the need for quantum computing. And I also don't know, if we're going to have to, advance eventually to, nuclear power, which is, so I just love, Brian, just to talk a little bit on the operational efficiency. I think everybody here is well grounded. Your brand is stabilization, move at the right time in a very responsible, safe way, appreciate their infrastructure and how to plot their journey to ensure everybody's moving, and also the affordability side. But let's kind of just parachute in a little bit more further out on the aspects of cloud, the computational risks of AI, and the efficiency story that you're bringing on sustainability, because I know everybody wants to hear about that that's listening.
Yeah, this is Jim and I tend to nerd out over our favorite beverages on back porches about this topic, and when we need to find cooler things to talk about. But we do everything we can to reduce our own carbon footprints. Like Jim's putting LED lights and reducing what's called the PUE in the data center, and cold out containment and all this sort of thing. But the real truth behind all of this is the single greatest contribution we and other service providers can make to environmental sustainability is closing down legacy DIY data centers. I'll talk about AI in a minute and the offset, because that is growing extremely fast and it is power hungry. But what would be an offset to that is keeping in mind that of all the applications in the world that run, Google Maps on your phone, or your banking application, or World of Warcraft, the world's portfolios of applications has proliferated grandly. Still, 70% of those applications run in data centers that are run by enterprises themselves. Now, of course, I would say this because I'm a service provider, but I've been in enough of them. Jim's been in enough of them to say, you're not a data center provider or an IT company. You're a healthcare company, or you're a logistics manufacturing company, or shipping company. You're not going to be great at running your own IT. So think of the world's application engine in two camps. First of all, let's talk about it as AI and legacy. And the vast majority of legacy, with AI growing extremely fast, but the vast majority is legacy. Then you break legacy up into two camps. You get DIY and you get outsourced. And outsourced could be anything like from Ensono or AWS or Azure or Google. But the 70% is still in DIY, where customers are still running their own physical buildings within which IT lives and applications live. And those things are typically wildly inefficient. And an analogy I like to use is, think of a DIY data center as the equivalent of a guy driving a Hummer to and from work every day. It gets 8 miles to the gallon. There's no catalytic converter. He never does maintenance on the thing. It spews smoke. He drives like a maniac, stomps on the gas when the light turns green, hammers the brakes when the light turns red, and he never carpools with anybody. And cloud data centers are the equivalent of maybe a futuristic electric bus or train built with the utmost of efficiency in mind, operated and maintained to a very high standard, and sometimes even powered with a certain percentage of renewable energy, and carrying 100 passengers all at the same time. So the difference in, just think of an app that runs in a DIY data center and one that runs in the cloud on microservices. If you take the extremes, you're literally talking about 1/20th of the energy consumption. So that's where we need to start. Now, that doesn't mean we're excused from the impact that we're seeing around these AI workloads. I did some quick math thinking about this, nerding out with Jim. And if you build a rack full of NVIDIA, I think it's the DXC or DXX server, the server made with the H100 chip, and if you built one of those things, it would use the equivalent of maybe 10 racks of like a standard legacy IT of power. It would weigh 2,500 pounds. It would cost $1.5 million. Jim wouldn't be able to keep it cool. He'd have to reinforce the floors. So as these things start to take over, and we don't yet know as a society how big the AI revolution is going to be, but we do need to obviously control the energy consumption that exists there and optimize it. But a great offset will be, let's not forget that the vast overwhelming majority of power consumption in IT right now is in legacy that is very, very wasteful.
Yeah, that's a really, really key point. do you think the boards of directors, in the conversations you're having, are educated enough on the consumption, sustainability risks of their legacy? And is that data getting to the top of the house so that, I mean, obviously, the IT people, everybody knows their operating budgets, but is the message on sustainability, obviously they're reporting on ESG, but are they getting enough concrete migration, focus?
So Brian, I'll jump in on that one real quick.
Yeah, take it.
You're actually on the board, but I am the Chief Sustainability Officer of Ensono. I just we don't have enough sentences by my name to have all the titles. So I report on the E part of ESG to the board and talk about it. And I talk about it every day, where it would be great for me to close every single data center I have today, open up all new ones, and support it with a much more efficient environment. However, the way that we are going to get more efficient in the data center world is through what Brian said, closing some of these legacy data centers, of course. But it's the utility grid, and it's obviously a huge topic for growth, is going through and changing that fossil fuel environment that we live in today to be renewable. What happens to me today is I pay my utility bill in our Chicago data center as an example. There is a large charge every month I pay to the energy provider there so they can start building renewable energy plants or continue to build them and get rid of the fossil fuel ones. How long is that going to take? 5 to 7 years before we see a real increase in that. And that's just with that public utility. So multiply that by X number across the US. That's really where the equation will start to make sense, and we will get more environmentally sustainable, is when the entire utility industry as well as data center providers, can kind of work together to improve the overall mix there.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I know you've got some strategic announcements on some of your data center capabilities. Do you want to talk about those, Brian? Because obviously you're really trying to position some key messages, as you build out your vision of the company. So want to make sure we've hit some of the key things you want to make sure are heard today.
Sure. Actually, the most recent one, the great tie-in to what we just talked about. So we did an announcement with Microsoft back in November for something we call the modern cloud connected mainframe. And without nerding out on it too much, we're fond of saying, like, and even I, 8 years ago, starting at Ensono, said mainframes are still around. And the answer actually is shocking, in that if you shut down every mainframe in the world right now, there would be a zombie apocalypse. And you wouldn't even be able to file an insurance claim if a zombie ate your face, because the insurance companies all use mainframe, the banks do, ATMs, airlines, everybody uses these things because they're tried and true, and their computational power is absolutely tremendous. But what ends up happening is you have these self-run data centers who have mainframes running in their data centers, and typically what run on mainframe are what is called systems of record, meaning like the flight scheduling system for airlines, or the insurance claim processing engine for an insurance company, or the core banking applications for a bank. And they are great at that. But what also tends to sit in those data centers around those mainframes, mere feet away, are systems of engagement, like an app on your mobile phone to check in for your flight for the airline, or a mobile banking application, not always mobile, but systems that engage with a human or an end user. That could even be an actuarial application that engages with an insurance actuary. So those systems of engagement require cloud type economics and agility. Constant change, like the Netflix recommendations engine, they change it 15 times a day. Mainframes are great at stability and massive processing, not so good at rapid change. So systems of engagement surround the mainframe and keep that data center in existence. So what we announced with Microsoft is we have a data center and a process whereby we'll take those mainframes and lift them out of these self-run data centers, physically put them right next to the cloud, and then there's kind of a vacuum effect of, okay, now those 10,000 servers that needed the mainframe nearby to do its thing, they can all go to cloud, and you can shut down that data center. So really topical announcement we did back November with Microsoft, this modern, and there's more to it. There's logical and physical, but that's the general concept. And we're hoping that, well, we're hoping to win business, obviously, but also hoping that it really helps shut down some of these legacy data centers that are really economically and environmentally inefficient.
Yeah, no, I think, proximity is always an attractor, right?
Latency, yeah, proximity and latency, that's right.
Good old physics, memory, it's the attractor theory. Jim, any builds on that you think are top of mind before we kind of go to the last question? Because obviously I'm curious about your thoughts on the OpenAI Microsoft mega data center announcement that they made, and whether or not you're close to the ground on that one.
Well, not the specific announcement Brian mentioned, but I see the question you had around nuclear power, and I think I'm thinking more and more every day about the utility grid and that. There are a lot of sources and ways to do this. If you think about a company you're probably familiar with, Bloom Energy, they had hydrogen cell technology from NASA that was supposed to revolutionize how we powered our data centers. I actually installed one in my Los Angeles data center a while back, and back in a former life, and it operated great, but it's not ready for scale, right? It's never scaled up and been the savior of the data center industry. I think it's the same thing about nuclear here, right? There's some amazing advancements happening with small modular reactors, and we're looking at that, but it's really in the kind of the medium to long term, right? 5 to 10, probably even longer period of time, just given the technology there. So you have to balance, the tried and the true versus, going straight for the shooting the moon, so to speak, on some of these technologies, both AI as well as data center technologies. So that's really my comment and thought there is we're looking at all the ways that we can do the things Brian mentioned earlier about improvements and changes, but it has to be done at a measured pace over time. It doesn't always sound the sexiest when you see all the announcements about what's happening with NVIDIA. They're now the most valuable company in the world, which is amazing. But that curve that we call the hockey stick, that's going to start to flatten a little bit, I think, over the next coming years. It's not necessarily going to flatten out. It'll just the curve will come down a little bit, but some of it will definitely become reality. Some will not.
Yeah, I think they're well past 3 trillion in valuation, surpassed Apple, I think, if I recall. One of the obviously we're almost out of time, so I think what I'd like to do is just kind of throw out one final thought question, and feel free, Brian, to take the lead, and Jim to echo. When you look at sort of the overall landscape, just a few points. We've been doing a series with EY and another organization, the Bedford Group, or the Trans Search, which is an executive recruiting firm, and EY, you'd know, Ernst & Young. And we've been bringing CEOs and senior executives together in Toronto on a regular basis, and a lot of board directors. We've been running one of sessions, and we shared the research on the value, return, and monetization of AI, and I think it's an important point here to make, because the global ROI is about 4.3% on these initiatives. It's very low in the gap of the sustaining aspects of the AI models, right? It's easy maybe it's not easy maybe to build these models, but to sustain is a whole other issue. So I think I kind of want to go back to some of the earlier points, Brian and Jim, that you made. We're definitely in a hype stage. We've got different dynamics going in the marketplace. We've got a lot of legacy issues to deal with, and you've got a very sound, thoughtful strategy to move. I really like the fact that you're giving a pathway to an outcome that gives comfort, right? Because there's that proximity aspect, which we talked about, which is a very good hook to move people in a safe way. The big question is the elevation of the responsibility to continue to move people forward, but in a way that's not going to put harm. I'm sure you've seen the reports on the job concern risks, and so you've got these different modalities going on in the market. What would be your closing comments to, let's say I'm another CEO of a large multinational, or a seasoned chairman of a board of directors, Fortune 500. What would be the 2 or 3 snippets that you think I have to have clearly in my mind as guardrails to think about, my little steps forward for the next couple of years? What would they be?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I've thought about this way too much. The ravings of a madman coming, but certainly there's going to be some job displacement. But the turn of phrase I think that's kind of floating around the zeitgeist lately is your job is not going to be taken by AI. but it will be taken by someone who knows how to use AI. And I think that's prescient. I think that's going to be common. Now, there will be absolutely some certain jobs taken away entirely. Like an example would be if you've ever been in a Panera Bread company, now there's a little computer screen and you order your own food. That has eliminated jobs, no question. There's a great podcast, by the way, on spreadsheets. When the spreadsheet first became big, they said it was going to take away a bunch of accountants' jobs who did financial planning scenarios. Because it was much easier now to kind of do it yourself. But what ended up happening is it created jobs because now people write an infinite number of scenarios based on, you'll know this well, sales forecasting. All right, change the sales forecast, run it through the P&L model. And that would have taken a guy with a spreadsheet and an eraser, 8 hours to do. And now it's, bloop, one number. But now it's propagated the number of models that are out there. And that one actually created FP&A jobs, for example. So there's going to be job displacement, no question. But I think that phrase of you have to be on the curve of using it. We at Ensono and our clients created a little collisional space to collect use cases because, as you said, the ROI and some are poor. And there's only so much money out there, by the way. This is why Jim's comments about we're going to see a little flattening for a little while. We're going to see a pause. And I think we're going to see that pause fairly shortly because there's only so much money on the right side that is either a consumer or a business with dollars in their hand or a cost takeout created by job elimination or job efficiency to fund the trillions of dollars going into AI on the left side. So we're probably going to see a pause. But I would encourage every kind of CEO board member out there to make sure that their company is doing the company they govern is doing the equivalent of okay, create a collisional space, create a place to collect this information or these ideas. And our company's full of them. It's wonderful to see people younger than me usually coming up with these amazing ideas on how to use AI, but have a process to divine down, okay, that might look neat, but what is the business value? Does it make my customer happier? Does it make my customer stickier? Does it help me sell more? Does it help me deliver something with less cost? And then optimize or prioritize those things and give them money. Budget cycles are going to come up here in the fall for most companies. Find a pot of money to say, you're going to have 50 ideas, get it down to 5 really good ones with a good ROI, and I will give you some money to fund those things. You are going to have to do those things. We may be in a hype cycle, but it is a hype cycle versus the 2000 dot-com bubble. That hype cycle was funded by debt and people without business plans. This hype cycle is funded by people with big, giant piles of cash. And those are two very different things. This is very real.
Yeah, very, very good point. I think just a few words come to mind. I love the fact you use the term collision space because that's reinforcing ideation and emergence.
Yes.
And experimentation and building capability. At the end of the day, the main message is you got to get going and you got to start learning in very thoughtful use cases that are well thought through. And that's part of the piece of the puzzle. Most of the investment's been going often into infrastructure, recruiting talent, building up capability, maybe even, data center, moving things to a data lake, blah, 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 but not really thinking through the use case and the return tightly and sustaining that investment. But I do think, the market research is coming out, and I do think, I don't want to say the valley of despair, but, the good old Gartner hype cycle, and that is starting to dip. People are, very focused on thoughtful applied applications. And I think as the legislation starts to come through, right? If we read the EU, the 200-page EU act, which I have, we know we're moving into a regulated environment and more responsibility, and it's just great to have you here with us because you're clearly very thoughtful in your business model and how you approach things. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian and Jim. It's been really wonderful, but I'll turn it back to Jen.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Brian and Jim, for joining us. And it sounds like just the two of you could have an amazing podcast recorded from your backyard with a beer in hand.
Brian, let's do it.
Love it.
And I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us on the Predictive World series by SalesChoice. And I invite them to go to saleschoice.com/resources to access all the other episodes and podcasts and white papers and more, and join us next time. Thanks.
Thank you.